In the short time that I have available, I hope to set out a compelling case for why the Minister should recommend to his colleague the Chancellor that he should cut beer duty in future budgets, should reform business rates and should continue to look at new ways of reducing the disproportionate tax burden on pubs and breweries. Representing a Black Country constituency as I do, and as chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Beer Group, which is the largest backbench all-party group in this House, I know what an important issue it is for many of our constituents. My own Dudley South constituency is home to 3 very distinct and individual brewers. There's Bathams, dating back to the 1860s, Black Country Ales, a much more recent and fast-growing brewery, and Marpardo's, one of the original CAMRA brewers. Of course.
I'm extremely grateful for him giving way, and can I congratulate him on the great work he does as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Beer Group, which, like many other members, I'm a member. But does he not agree that, whilst it's very welcome that the government extended rate relief to pubs, that it is disappointing they didn't also extend it to small music venues, which often are also places where people drink the occasional beer?
Well, of course, the extension in rate relief, business rate relief, was part of support for high streets in particular, but also, as he says, community pubs. And so I think there is a particular value, but I certainly wouldn't be opposed to the kind of measures to which he's referring. When we last debated beer duty in this House, in Westminster Hall in October 2017, I said that there were 75 pubs in my constituency. Now I'm afraid there are only 73 pubs. Now that, despite my very best efforts...
Try harder. Try harder.
A decline... Please.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way. Would he not agree with me? He talks about disappearing pubs in his constituency. You don't actually have to be a drinker to enjoy the benefits of... Joe Cox, our late, much-missed friend, talked about the loneliness agenda. I'm a non-drinker, but I'm very upset that we're losing the Goldsmiths Arms in East Acton. It's been there since 1826 when it was a coaching inn. 2,180 people have signed the petition. But it does feel under this government, often people power and planning law are in conflict, and greedy developers often have too much power on their side.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would caution against trying to turn this into a party political issue, because although... pubs are still, the number of pubs is still reducing, and it is reducing at a far too high rate. It is a rather slower rate than was the case before 2010. So there are obviously a number of factors that lead to pub closures, some of which more in the control of government and public authorities than others. Where government can act to slow down, stop and reverse pub closures, I'd very much encourage them to do so.
The honourable friend give way.
I will give way behind me first to my right honourable friend.
I'm most grateful to him for giving way. Does he agree with me that the closure of a public house often has a far more devastating effect in a rural area where the pub is the centre and heart of the community, often acting as a shop, a music venue, a tavern to the local people who live there?
My right honourable friend, of course, is quite right, and I will speak about the particular importance of rural community pubs later, but of course even in our towns and our high streets, our pubs are often absolutely key to local identity, and we're now in a position, I think, where more people give direction by pubs than probably by road names. I did promise my right honourable friend I would give way, and then I will.
Very grateful to my honourable friend who's making a superb speech, as always. And on this point about declining the number of pubs, of course, we shouldn't forget that one area of enormous growth in the industry over the last 10 years is the proliferation of craft brewers. I'm sure every single member here would have an excellent craft brewery in their constituency, and they often run tap houses. So does my honourable friend recognise the real importance of the small brewers' tax relief to the growth of craft brewers, and will he make that part of his discussion with the Chancellor and the Treasury?
My right honourable friend, I think, preempts a later part of my speech, and the honourable lady for Stoke-on-Trent North is similarly indicating that she may just touch upon this a little bit later. But yes, the rise in the number, the variety of smaller and particularly craft breweries over the last decade and a half has been one of the key features of the sector, and of course is partly down to the success of the Small Brewers Relief. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be. I did promise the honourable gentleman that I would give way.
Grateful to him, and my congratulations to those other people in securing this important debate. He's absolutely right about rural pubs. I think something that's often overlooked, however, is the importance of the last pub on a council estate in many of our towns. And on many of those estates, the last pub has closed, and it's a huge impact on the facilities that are available for people to get together. So whilst I support entirely what he says about rural pubs, let's make sure we don't forget that issue of council estate.
Can I just stop? Mr Perkins, you want to speak? We're on the 5-minute limit. If we're going to intervene, I don't want to have to drop people down, but I want everybody to have the same fair chance. Mike Wood, less interventions on those who are speaking will help us all.
I'll consider myself duly reprimanded, Mr Deputy Speaker. Suffice to say that, once again, I strongly agree, and having seen within the Black Country the impact of derelict pubs of varying sizes, standing monument within housing estates and in town centres. One last intervention, and then I must move on, otherwise Mr Deputy Speaker will shout at me.
I'm really grateful to the honourable gentleman and congratulate him on securing this debate and the powerful speech he's making. I just wanted to pick up on that point of pub closures. The Black Bull pub in Barnsley East closed last year, and the 250-year-old building is due to be demolished. Does he share the sadness, and what does he think we can do to improve the situation?
Well, I share the sadness whenever a well-used pub closes for any reason, and of course particularly where that is a heritage building within our towns, cities and villages, it has a particular impact on the community. Last autumn, 116,000 people up and down the country signed the Long Live the Local campaign, many of them emailing their MPs. It was launched by Britain's Beer Alliance, very quickly garnered public support from licensees, from beer drinkers, many more. And I know that the success of that petition and everybody who united behind that campaign was absolutely pivotal in persuading the Treasury of the need for action to support beer and pubs. And I'm delighted that the Chancellor listened to those passionate calls and froze beer duty once again, because the beer and pub sector is vital in our country. Nearly 900,000 people up and down the United Kingdom rely on the industry for work. 43% of those are younger people, aged 16 to 24, and more than half of them are women. Supporting the pub trade, fantastic way to reduce youth unemployment, but also to develop skills amongst young people. This House saw first-hand the impact that apprenticeships across the hospitality sector have and the opportunities available during the apprenticeship showcase in National Apprenticeship Week. One more.
I thank my honourable friend that he's making an extremely good point about the opportunities for people in this industry. Does he agree with me that this is one of those industries where you can quite literally start behind the bar and end up as the chief executive or the chairman of quite a big company?
My honourable friend's spot on, and when I was helping judge the pub chef and young pub chef of the year at this time last year, we spoke to a number of people who were still not yet in their mid-20s, who were not only running their own kitchen, but in a number of cases were now running multi-million-pound turnover businesses in their own right. And there are very few other sectors where people at a young age can go into an industry with next to no start-up capital and have those opportunities for rapid career progression to be running their own business. Brewing is also a true success story for homegrown British manufacturing. Staggering 82% of all beer consumed in this country is made in this country, and we have over 1,800 breweries in the UK, 149 in the West Midlands alone. In my Dudley South constituency, the sector accounts for 1,068 jobs, 315 of them under 25, contributes over £34 million in gross value added to the Treasury's coffer, for which I'm sure my honourable friend the Minister is very grateful. Nationally, the sector adds nearly £23 billion to the UK economy and contributes almost £13 billion in taxation to the Treasury. Some of us would argue that is a little bit disproportionate. £1 in £3 spent in pubs goes straight into Treasury coffers, with an average for every pub in the country of £140,000 being raised for the taxman every year. So I strongly welcome the Chancellor's announcement of a review of small brewers' relief for the reasons that my right honourable friend.
Small breweries like St Peter's in my constituency have a proven track record in exporting their beers all around the world. They can expand, open up new markets and create more jobs if export volumes were excluded from small breweries' relief. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the Treasury should do this exclusion as part of their review of small breweries' relief?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this point, and I think it is one that certainly needs to be considered. I understand the concerns that the Treasury has in terms of risk of fraud and opportunities to actually enforce it, and particularly legality at the moment under the current European duty framework. But on beer duty has in the past divided this House, but there's now a general agreement on all sides that it is already high and we certainly need to avoid rises. When the hated beer duty escalator was introduced by Gordon Brown, beer duty rose by a staggering 42%. And at the same time, beer consumption in the UK fell by 16% overall and by nearly a quarter in our pubs. Almost 7,000 pubs called time for good, and more than 58,000 beer-dependent jobs were lost. This was a very expensive policy failure, and the price was paid by beer drinkers and publicans and employees alike. So I'm delighted that as a country we're now, of course, drinking more beer, but we're also paying less tax on it as a proportion of the cost. However, the amount of this beer being sold in pubs continues to fall, and whilst the rate of pub closures has slowed, as I said in answer to a previous question, they're still closing at a disturbing rate. I will very briefly, I can see.
I thank him very much for giving way and commend him on the speech he's making. Pubs are very important in my constituency, and the brewery Shepherd Neame is the largest employer, as well as I see colleagues nodding, the producer of excellent beer. But lower alcohol beers are becoming increasingly popular. So on the subject of duty rates, does he agree with me that there may be a case for looking at the threshold at which you get duty relief for lower alcohol beers?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know that my honourable friend for Waveney would also agree with St Peter's being a major advocate of this argument as well. Clearly, the European Union, within their beer duty framework, is in the process of changing those thresholds, and I would hope that the Treasury, regardless of what form of Brexit we end up with, will make sure that at the very least we follow those mechanisms that are already in place, amending the threshold for low alcohol level to a threshold where it's rather more viable for brewers to produce at that strength, encouraging people down from 4-point-something to around 3% is better for people's health. If we can make sure that it's fiscally better for the brewer as well, then so much the better. Now, as Cameron's made clear, one of the opportunities as we leave the European Union, and we know from last night's discussion that there's an element of disagreement as to what should happen next, but one of the opportunities is we are able to take back control of our excise duty regime. So this gives the Chancellor an opportunity to look afresh at how we tax beer in pubs in particular, how we can use fiscal measures to help pubs thrive, to support responsible drinking and to redress the imbalance, the competitive disadvantage that our community pubs are against particularly supermarkets that are able to stack them high, sell them below cost and use them as a loss leader. Of course.
It's particularly on that point. Does he therefore agree with Colin Shavels of Balance North East, who commissioned an independent survey of publicans, that it is cheap alcohol, cheap booze in the supermarkets that is dangerous to our pubs and causing more closure than alcohol duty?
Well, I think there are a range of factors. I think beer duty certainly is part of it, but business rates is a massive factor in the pressures affecting our pubs. And for these pubs to flourish, to remain the beating hearts of our communities and to continue to compete as businesses, then they need the investment that comes and is only possible if the tax burden is kept at a sensible level. So I really can't. I ought to have finished by now. Now, the 3 duty cuts and 2 beer tax freezes that we've seen under successive Conservative Chancellors, they've secured thousands of pub jobs on hundreds of pubs. They've boosted confidence in our brewing and pub businesses, and those businesses have continued to invest in the sector. They've increased beer sales, boosting the Treasury's total tax take from beer. This is a win-win situation, and I would encourage the Minister and the Chancellor to win even more by giving us a fair deal on beer taxes. So I would ask the Minister to urge the Chancellor to go further. Hard-pressed UK beer drinkers still pay 40% of all of Europe's beer duty, despite only drinking 12% of the beer consumed. Now, 12%, you could argue, possibly not yet enough. Crucially, 7 in 10 alcoholic drinks sold in pubs are beer. By helping British beer, you're helping British manufacturing, you're also helping our community pubs. But we do have to address business rates. We need fundamental reform. The relief announced in the budget last autumn, enormously helpful. I think it's about 80% of pubs benefiting, but they're still hugely overtaxed. Despite only making up about 0.5% of total business turnover, our pubs represent about nearly 3% of all business rate payments. So, beer and pubs are a great British success story. We can help them to prosper and to succeed if we can spare industry and consumers from the burden of high beer duty and unfair business rates and use our duty framework to support our community pubs. I thank the Backbench Business Committee for finding the time, thank members for supporting this debate, look forward to the Minister's response.
The question is, as on the order paper, with a 5-minute limit, Ruth Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate my friend and chairman